everybody. Welcome back, or I should say welcome to my first mini PL session. So glad you guys could join me today. And today I'm going to chat a little bit about documentation and what do I include in a piece of documentation. We all know that documentation is an important part of our curriculum. It's chatted about in How Does Learning Happen, and it's really an essential part of what we do as educators and as supervisors and directors and owners, what we mentor in our educators as well too. So sometimes it can be hard to know where to start and what to look for, what to capture, what to write. So I'm hoping that today I can give you a few ideas to kind of get you started. So firstly, when we think about creating a piece of documentation, we always want to capture children's confidence and their strengths. So we want to focus on something that they're able to do, not something that they're not able to do. And obviously this is evident for many reasons. We always want to focus on what children are able to do and the positives. But also specifically when we're thinking about afterwards with our documentation, if we're going to study it with other people, we want our conversation to be rich and to be lively and to be full of our focus being on what the children are able to do and what we think they're thinking about and the questions that they have. So always remember that when you are choosing something to document and to write a piece of documentation about, make sure that it's something that is going to highlight children's strengths and competencies. So I'm going to chat about three things briefly to include in a piece of documentation when you're writing something up. And so the first thing is to describe your observations. Secondly is to search for meaning. And thirdly is to consider the reader. So if we think about the first thing, describe your observations. So you want to think about what did you see, what did you hear, and you want to use really rich and descriptive language that's really going to bring the reader, most likely a person who wasn't part of the experience or who didn't observe what you observed, into the experience so they can have an idea of what you saw, what you heard, what was going on at that time. And so this is very descriptive. So you might think about describing children's facial expressions or their body language or physical actions, movement they had, words or phrases you heard them speak specifically. What else? If they were singing or humming, anything really that can capture the experience as it was and to be able to describe it. And so that's the first part of what you want to be able to capture. Now, oftentimes, this is kind of where documentation can end, is it can kind of become just a recounting of an event. Here's what I saw, and here's what happened. And sometimes it can kind of just be left there. And that's where the second part of this comes in, where you want to search for meaning. So once you've been able to describe the experience that you saw, you want to search for meaning from the child and from your own perspective as well too. So in thinking about the child, you want to write a little bit about, what do you think the child was thinking? And I say, what do you think they were thinking? Because obviously you're not going to know specifically. So you might think about, were they trying to test a theory that they might have had? Were they trying to build a new skill? Were they revisiting a prior idea or an experience they had? Again, some of these things you might not know, and so that's why when you write it, you say, perhaps the child was thinking this, or it seemed as though maybe they were testing this idea based on, something that I've noticed before, something I've seen before. So oftentimes it's not necessarily concrete in terms of what you think the child was thinking, but it's inviting you to think more deeply about what you saw and why that was meaningful for the child. And then you want to write a little bit about, why did you choose to document that experience? Why was it meaningful for you? What delighted you as you watched that experience? What kind of drew you in and said, out of everything that's happened in my day, this experience, this I want to capture, this I want to write about, this I want to study with other people, this I want to share with families. What was it about that experience that was so meaningful to you? What did it leave you wondering? What did it leave you wanting to think more about? And so think a little bit about why did you choose to capture that anyway? So that's the second part of it. So first you want to describe your observations in as rich and lively language as you can. Secondly, you want to search for meaning. So think about, and talk a little bit about, what was meaningful for the child, or what do I think the child was thinking about? Why was this meaningful for me? What delighted me when I saw this? What am I thinking about afterwards? And then thirdly, you want to consider your reader. And this is where a title comes in. And so when you read a piece of documentation or when you open a book, the title is what draws you in. So if you go to Chapters or to Indigo, well, I guess you would go prior to the pandemic, because we don't really get to go out as much anymore. But when you would go into a bookstore, it's the title that would draw you in, that would say, yes, I want to read more about this, or I want to read the summary or the synopsis. And so that's the same thing with a piece of documentation. Your title is what's going to draw the reader in, is what's going to give them a lens for which to read your piece of documentation. So you want to think carefully about, if it was an experience that had to do with painting, and it had to do with, the way that two children work together, the friendship that happened between them in the paint, or, a theory that they were testing with how they mixed colors, or something like that. If you were to just title it a painting experience, it doesn't really give a lens for which you want the reader to look at, to read your piece and consider. So you want to think carefully about, what do I want to call this piece of documentation, because I want to think about, this is what I want my reader to think more about. So those are the three things that I wanted to chat a little bit about today, and to also recognize that after you finish this piece of documentation, it's not done yet. So what makes documentation pedagogical, as is talked about in How Does Learning Happen, is when you take this piece to colleagues and you study it together and you try and make meaning of it together, and you think about, what does this mean? What does this mean for our practice, for the way that we set up our environment, for the materials that we offer? That's where it becomes pedagogical, and that's where you start to learn from it, and to build meaning together, and to have something come as a result of this piece. But that is another video. How do you study a piece of documentation? What questions do you ask? How do you do that? That will be another video, so stay tuned. Anyways, I hope that this was helpful. If you'd like to chat more about documentation, or you have questions, or you have a piece that you're writing and you want to chat a little bit more about it, would love to chat more with you. Feel free to send me an email at victoria@sbsconsulting.ca, or drop me a message in the little text box here, and I can connect with you that way. Otherwise, happy documenting.